Welcome to the Food Startups Podcast.
Hey guys, welcome to the Food Startups Podcast, our first episode in 2015. It's been a really good start for me, Matt. I've gone to both coasts of the US, spent about 6 weeks in the US, now back here on the supply side in Colombia, launched a brand. Things are going really well. It's been quite the hustle to begin the year. Now, I wanted to mention that Danny is no longer with the show. He's still a really good friend of the show and of me. He's just too busy. He's got 2 businesses and he's really doing well, but he just doesn't have the time that it takes to make a podcast because it's a lot of work, from finding the guests to the material to writing the website to social media and editing. So I understand, and he will be back sometime in the future as a guest, and it'll be great to have him back. Now, I wanted to go into some of the philosophies for this year. I'm getting more authors because I've been reading a lot of books related to food. I'm trying to get any type of edge I can because, as you guys know, it's quite difficult. The chips are stacked against you as a small business and a small startup in the food industry. So I've gone to a certain set of authors, and I'll call them practitioners first, authors second. These are people that have been established in some sector of the food industry, and then they wrote a book about it, as opposed to someone with just some type of theory that writes a book about it. And I find these books to be much more applicable and helpful. Today we have Tessa Stuart. She's a packaging expert in the UK, and she works with top brands. It's not just packaging, which is incredibly important, but packaging involves a lot of things, and it goes from psychology to even anthropology. So I'm going to go right into our interview with Tessa Stuart. She started out studying history and boys at Oxford University, and then she got a proper job in branding research, working for large brands in the UK like Cadbury and Nestle on new products and sexy ads for chocolate bars. She now has her own research firm where she lurks in the chilled aisles of major supermarkets, watching and talking to shoppers as they make their food choices. Her clients include established UK food and drink brands like Innocent Drinks, Rude Health, and Moma Foods. She helps food brands nail their customer offer, color, sizing, branding, and pack health messages so they can attract maximum attention and success. More than 20 years of experience in the business. So I'm very happy to have you on today. Tessa, can you tell us how you got your start and why you decided to start Tessa Research?
Well, thank you very much for having me on your podcast. I'm honored, and it's great to be here. So why did I start my own business? Well, if I'm really honest, it's because I didn't want to be contributing to the senior director's pension pots any longer. I wanted to be building something of my own. And I got to 29 and I was in a northern town doing focus groups on my birthday because I was too junior really to say no. And I thought, this has to change. I can't be spending more nights of my life talking to consumers, because here you do the focus groups and you start at 5 p.m. and you finish work about 10 o'clock. By the time you clear out and get to your hotel, it can be 11 o'clock before you get into your hotel room. And I just thought, this is no way to live. I think there has to be a better way to do this. I wanted to have children. I wanted to have more control over my own time. And I wanted to do the research in a way that was more meaningful for the people in the focus groups, actually, because I don't know if you've ever been in a focus group, but it's quite an artificial environment. You're sitting there with a bunch of strangers who you don't know very well. The tendency is to try and make yourself seem better than you are. So, for example, I would do some research on organic foods, and everybody in the room would say to me and say within the group context with these strangers listening, oh, I always buy organic. And, I would look at how we'd recruited them, what specification we'd given before we did the group. And I'd think, well, hang on. No, you were not meant to be buying organic. You were meant to be somebody that never buys organic. So I think we have this terrible tendency, well, maybe it's a very human tendency, to try and make ourselves appear better than we actually are. It's certainly in the UK, it's women that do most of the shopping, and they buzz around, they do it themselves. So I thought if I interviewed people in the aisles, I would be able to build rapport with them more easily, and I might be able to get them to be more honest. And the other thing I could do is I could look in their basket and check to see what they were actually buying. So, for example, if I was doing an organic project, then I would look in their basket and see what they've got in there, and if they're genuinely buying organic, if they're genuinely buying my client's products. One of the rules I set for myself now when I'm in the aisles is that people have to be looking at the product that I'm researching, so they must be looking at it. I don't kind of wander off and find other people and get a bit just desperate and bring them over there and say, well, could you just look at these yogurts for me? They must be actually standing there and looking and making a purchase decision. And then I'll usually check in their baskets. I'll see, what they've bought before I interview them. So I do quite a lot of lurking and spying, a kind of weird way of doing it, but it means that I make sure that everybody that I interview is absolutely right for my clients' commercial objectives.
And Tessa, walk me through this. What do you wear? How do you get them to talk about what they're doing and not appear like a strange person in the supermarket?
Well, Matt, you've really asked me a challenging questions. I wear thermals, so I will wear layers and layers and layers because the chilled aisles, and I wish I had more clients who weren't in the chilled aisles, so I'm putting out a little plea here. I'd like some cheese biscuits, please, or some chocolate bars that aren't in the aisles. I'm hoping for a marshmallow job, and luckily that could be a bit warmer. But yeah, basically I put my thermals on and I put really good shoes on because I'm going to be on my feet for quite a while. I always go and chat up all of the store staff. So I'll talk to the manager and I'll talk to the shelf stackers, because you find out a huge amount from shelf stackers. I can talk to the guys that put the food on the shelves, and I can just say to them, okay guys, so which product do you have to replenish more often? And they will say, oh, you know what? That one never shifts. Nobody ever buys that one. Or they'll say, oh, this one is flying out. So you actually get a lot of information just from the guys that you would think you wouldn't need to interview, the shelf stackers, because, they're the ones that are putting the product on the shelf. So I make like an ordinary shopper. I have a wire basket. I don't have a clipboard. And I will just be kind of browsing maybe a different category on the other side of the aisle. And then I'll just be watching people very carefully. And then when they look like they're looking at the category that I'm interested in, then I'll go over to them and I'll say, excuse me, I see you're looking at X. I wonder if I could ask you just a couple of quick questions because my client is Y. So I'll give the name of the client. They're new in this business and they're thrilled that you're looking at their product. Could I just ask you a little bit about it? And actually, most people are really, really happy to be part of that process. They're really happy to be part of it because I'm kind of non-threatening. There's a trick that you can do to be non-threatening to people, and you stand with your feet not directly pointing at them. You turn your feet slightly away and your whole body away so that it's not like face to face, you're just slightly oblique. And that is much less threatening in body language terms. And I'm really quick, I'm really focused, and probably I'll have watched them for a little bit anyway. So I will have my questions ready and I'll say, well, did you happen to notice this product on the shelf? Or have you ever bought this one? And quite often they will reach out and pick it off the shelf. And then I've got like a ready-made opening. So, excuse me, I'm doing research for this client and you've just picked their product off the shelf. Could you tell me why and what you're going to do with it and why you particularly picked it off the shelf? So you're kind of straight into that. You don't do any kind of preamble. And most of the time, women really like talking about food. They food shop a lot and it's something they have to do all the time. And I think to be asked what they think in the aisles kind of makes the shopping trip a little more interesting. Because I'm looking for trends. I'm looking for, do most people react to this sort of thing on the pack? Are they reacting to the price? Is there an ingredient that's really turning them on? Do they think it's too expensive? You're looking for patterns.
I made a halfway attempt to make a career out of studying body language. It's a long story, but I came across Desmond Morris. I would think you may know who he is. And for listeners, I'm going to link to his book. He has a fantastic book called People Watching, A Guide to Body Language. Body language is key for everything and not just selling food. But great. Already touched on what I would say is anthropology, right? So not so much focus groups, but in-store observations of people. I also wanted to touch really quick because I haven't seen it. It may be in the US. Innocent, like the fruit and vegetable smoothies, is a pretty large brand in the UK, as I understand. Can you tell us, I don't know if this is confidential, but some of the things that you've helped Innocent on?
I certainly can. They had an adult smoothie brand and drink, and they wanted to make one for kids. So they said to me, could you help us? And actually, we did do focus groups on that one because we wanted the kids to play with some prototype packaging. So we got the kids after school. So they were a bit wired anyway. So I think I had like 6 8-year-olds in a viewing facility with a mirror, and the client was watching the other side. And these kids were pretty wired because they'd just come out of school and they had not run around and run off their energy. And basically what we did is we took a lot of kids' drinks, was selling very, very strongly, and we wanted to know what the kids thought about them, because Innocent's challenge was having to build a product that would appeal to the mothers who would be buying it. So they would have health cues on the packaging and the mothers would feel happy buying it, but also that the kids would be proud to have in their lunch boxes, would want to take out at school and maybe talk about and try and get a bit of pester power going, what we call pester power in the UK, where you get the kids to pester the mothers to buy the product. We had this little white wedge, so it was like a Tetra Pak. You know how juices, I think in the US, probably come in Tetra Paks, those kind of square, kind of brick-shaped things.
Yeah,
Only Innocent had to make theirs into a wedge shape because they wanted to get one portion of fruit in, and the only way to do it was to make it into a little wedge. So it wasn't like brick-shaped, it was wedge-shaped, which meant that when you were poking the straw into it, you had to put your hand behind it and support it and then stab the straw in through the top. You couldn't just stand it on the table because it would kind of likely fall over because it was narrower at the top. I had to check with the kids was whether they could physically on their own get a straw into the drink, all on their own work out how to do it. So we just put some drinks out and said, here guys, here are some drinks for you to try. And just to see, just again, using that observation, just to see if the kids could work out how to get the straw in themselves, because if they couldn't, then we realized it wouldn't be very good and the mums would not sort of like it. Did they like the different shape? And we had some games on the packaging that the Innocent designers had drawn on, so some characters and also some games. And we just wanted to see what the kids' reaction was to that, whether it was sufficiently playful and we had the right kind of things. So we put these out for the kids. And we put out one of the big competitors with lots of advertising spend. And I said to the kids, okay, so this is Robinson's Fruit Shoot. Robinson's is a very established drinks brand in the UK for kids. And they had very brightly coloured packaging. And I said to them, this Fruit Shoot, is this the drink you like to be seen with in the playground? And they all went, yeah, we love Fruit Shoot. And I said, why do you love it? And they said, because it makes us hyper and we really like that. It just gets us high. It's got so much sugar in it. And then they said, and if we shake it up, the packaging is such that we can use it as a water pistol in the playground. So we can have juice fights. We would never have known that fact if we hadn't spoken to the kids in such detail about how the products were used by them. We did the research and the kids' drink turned into a £50 million brand, 50 million turnover a year, which, I think it took Innocent by surprise. And then the other thing they found is that adults liked drinking it. You sometimes get this crossover if you have a product where people take and use it in ways you didn't expect. And actually many adults drank the kids' drink because it was a thinner smoothie and they liked the texture better. It was a little bit more thirst quenching than the adult version.
I think we've both touched on this point. I really like anthropology. I'm not an anthropologist by any means, but I do recommend, I bought this wonderful book last year, Beginner's Guide to Anthropology. It's like 100 pages long. It's a 2-hour read. It's really good to have the basic concepts of anthropology in your toolbox. Now, Tessa, I want to get on to the mistakes. I'm sure you see them everywhere, whether or not they are your client. Is it the design, the messaging, the packaging, the size and usability? Shed some light on some common mistakes, especially for startups, as this podcast is geared more towards people in the startup phase.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I often see is where the startup has spent ages coming up with a brand name. And they're really, really proud of their brand name. And then they just make it so big on the packaging that there isn't much room left to describe what the product is. And although people are interested in the name of the company, that it isn't actually going to be the first thing that they're going to learn about or be interested in your brand. They're not interested in it. They're interested in what can that product do for me? Is it going to make my life easier? Does it make getting dinner on the table more convenient? Is it going to make me feel happy because it's chock full of chocolate? How am I going to benefit from that? And that's really the thing that you need to communicate. And there is this test you can do. It's called the 4-meter standing back test. And if you have a designer, you can get them to make different versions of your product. They can just mock it up. They can run off the printing and just wrap it around an existing product. Most designers should be able to do that for you. And you should go and put it on a shelf anywhere that you think you would eventually sell it. And you should just ask random strangers like I do, if they're passing along, what do they think about it? I know many food brands in the UK who've done this because it's just one way of testing. Is it communicating what I think it's communicating? Because you can sit there with your designer thinking, oh, that looks fabulous in a meeting room somewhere. And actually, when you get it out into the real world and you put it alongside the competition, you'll suddenly see, oh my gosh, it looks a bit small, or it looks a bit kind of unfinished, or maybe it looks a bit amateur. I mean, these are the things that you need to check. And the main thing is you want people to look at it and know what it is. You want people to look at it and know what it can do for them. If you look at innocent drinks, they use a lot of fruit images. So they don't write out the word fruit. They're using rich imagery of the actual fruits that are in their different recipes. And it's much easier for us to look at a picture of an apple and go, oh, yeah, apple. It's almost like it bypasses those areas of our brain where we actually have to compute what we're seeing, because we're familiar with what fruit looks like. So we can look at a picture of a strawberry or a pineapple or a mango, and immediately it's almost like our pleasure centers are activated by seeing it. So you can get someone to start thinking, oh, I'm really thirsty. Actually, you know what? That looks amazing. And before they know it, their hand will be out to take that off the shelf. The third thing is think about the colours that you're going to use. I mean, a lot of the brands I work with, I'm just looking at my shelf of packaging here, and a lot of the brands I work with use quite strong colours, because in the supermarket, if you're up against, let's say Kellogg's, well, I can actually get people to describe the colours of Kellogg's here because we know the branding so well. And it's something I do in my research, is you want people to be able to describe a product. So if you've got some properties that you can own, whether they're colour or their shape, or a particular, maybe a sheen on your packaging. A lot of my clients use sheen and shine. That can be a bit difficult when you're starting out because it can be a bit expensive, but you can always use colour. And also, I think being a bit diffident, sometimes the personality of the founder comes through, and if they're a little bit diffident or a bit timid, then often that will come through in their packaging because they will have chosen packaging that kind of accords with their personal comfort levels. So you'll find that shouty people produce quite shouty packaging because they're quite comfortable with that. And introverted people will often produce quite quiet packaging. And sometimes I meet people and they've got fabulous products. And I just say, you need to ramp it up a bit in the packaging. You just need the packaging to shout off the shelf, not in an aggressive kind of way, but just make it really clear who you are and what you're doing. Because you can't afford to be recessive. You can't afford to be a quiet brand on the shelf if you're new. You can't. You'll just be lost.
So even if you're an introverted founder of a food startup, you have to have an extroverted packaging and brand-facing product.
Well, I think so, because, something's going to have to do the talking for you. And I'm naturally quite mouthy. I don't mind standing up in front of people and talking about my product or talking about branding, and I'm kind of able to do it. But I'm actually quite introverted as well. So I can go and do those things. But I meet people who, for example, maybe they're in love with making marshmallows in their kitchen and they've given up their job because they just wanted to do something quiet and calming. But, at some point, they have to sell that product in order to be able to maintain that lifestyle or keep on doing what they want to do. And, you just can't be quiet. You have to be really pushy in this game. I often meet people and they start up and I say to them, so how's it going with the sales? Have you been into any shops? Have you pitched to any shops? And they're like, no, I haven't done that yet. I'm perfecting my website. You just need to get out there. You need to get those first few orders. You have to get the momentum and keep the momentum. I think there's a real momentum in small food businesses, and it's like you just have to keep those energy levels up very, very high, and you have to learn to sell. And if you can't sell, then you need to be in partnership with somebody who can.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And I would say I'm kind of in the middle of the introverted, extroverted continuum. But for listeners, I mean, what Tessa's doing, walking up to people in grocery stores, or what I've done in Colombia and in US on both coasts, going into grocery stores and trying to talk to buyers. After a while, it's very difficult at first, but after a while, if you want to become extroverted, that's a great way to do it.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I think practice makes perfect. And, you wouldn't believe that when I was kind of 14, I couldn't say boo to a goose. I had my head in a book. I would never look anybody in the eye. And I actually deliberately chose to do a career in market research, which made me connect with strangers night after night after night, because I thought, I have to get over this shyness. I can't be like this all my life. I need to correct it. And now I can walk into a room, whether it's a party or wherever, and just go up to people and say, hi, I'm Tessa, tell me about you. Because I realized that actually if you focus on the other person rather than your fears and worries that you have about how you yourself will be seen, if you put all your attention on that other person and being interested in them, then suddenly all the nervousness just kind of drops away if you're genuinely interested in finding out what they think. It's one of the most valuable lessons I've learned, really. And it's actually one of the reasons that keeps me in food, because it is still a challenge.
It really helps you grow as a person. First couple of times I got rejected, I took it so personally. And I remember being nervous, and then I would look, I wanted to sell this organic beverage drink in Bogota to this French cafe. And I got there like a block away, and I'm like, oh, it's like French, they're way too refined for my blue-collar American product. There's no way I can get in there, and it's really cool. So it really helps you grow as a person. So you've talked about in your book, Packed, right? Which, by the way, listeners, and I mentioned this in the intro, fantastic book. I think you can read it in about an hour and a half. She didn't make it 300 pages. She made it 100 pages filled with quotable things that you can remember as guides. One thing that you mentioned, you work with brands to get to consistent shelf space. It's like, okay, I've gotten past that first hump. I'm not unknown company. I'm on a lot of shelf. How do they move on to be a household name? What are those final steps to get to that second level?
Well, I think you raise an interesting point there. I mean, it's very easy to look back at the success of a company like Innocent Drinks, who actually, I think, have been going something like 17 years now. And at the beginning, they weren't very well known, but they began in West London, which coincidentally is where I live and work. And so they became very quickly well known in West London. They had these fantastic little vans covered in AstroTurf, which are known as grassy vans. They would drive around delivering the juice in these little grassy vans. And everybody knew the grassy vans, and people wanted to touch them and have a look at them. They had a couple that were like cows as well, I think. And so even their little vehicles were very recognizable, and they would kind of toot if they saw you, if you waved at them. So they kind of grew their presence almost through their vehicles as well. And then they kind of moved out from West London. I mean, one of the things that you need to try and do is be stocked in as many supermarkets and with as many distributors as possible. People sometimes come to me and say, oh, I'm exclusively going with just one distributor. And you just think, well, why are you doing that? You need to get your product out to as many places as you possibly can. So why would you pick just one distributor? You need to be all over the place. And obviously there is an issue of limited manpower. One of the things that has helped a lot of my clients is when they get into, say, the first 100 stores, they look at the sales figures and they see which stores they sell very well in and which stores maybe they don't sell so well in. And then they will go and sample their product in those stores. So they will make a point of going and being in those stores maybe on a Friday or a Saturday where there are lots of people, lots of traffic, lots of people shopping, and they'll be handing out samples of the product. And what happens when you do that is that your sales will go up not only on that day, but for a period of time after you've done the sampling. So you can really kick up your rate of sale. And when the supermarkets are looking at your rate of sale, they look at it across all of the stores. So if you can kick it up in some of them, so you really get it up high, then it can offset the ones where maybe you're not doing so well, because they'll sort of take an average across all the stores and they'll say, well, I see you're selling at this rate. Your rate of sale is one of the important things. Now, one of the things that you have to do, really, if you're going to compete in the UK, is you will have to run some promotions. We've become a society where we're very, very attracted to promotions. And if you're a new brand and people don't know you, one of the things you can do to drop the barriers that people have about buying a new product is to take, let's say, a pound off the price. Because it just drops that financial barrier and it makes people think, oh, you know what, okay, they've got a pound off, I'll give it a go.
Is there a fear, though, if you always are discounting your product? Let's just say you have a product that to be profitable, you need like a $5 price point. But if you're always selling it at $4, is there a danger of making your brand become like a little bit devalued to the price point that you need to sell it at?
Oh, I would totally agree. In fact, the first business I ever worked with in food, they only sold on discount. They pretty much only had their sales on discount. And I went and did some research for them. And I went back to the founder and I said, you do realize that people will only buy you when you're discounted? And he went, well, what's the problem with that? And I said, because you're training them to never buy you full price. So the discount that I would recommend is no more than 25% off. You need to build your product pricing and your margin calculations so that you can make those promotions, because a supermarket or Whole Foods will ask you to make them. The other thing that's really, really good is if you do 2 for £5. So then you're shifting 2 products, you're making people buy 2, and you're giving them not like a massive discount, no more than kind of 25%, not all the time. So you'd kind of rotate it around. If you're a new brand and you get in there and you go, oh, dear God, they want me on this promotion, what am I going to do? You can. I've had various clients where they've filled the pot a little bit less maybe and relabeled it at a slightly different weight point. They have to make their numbers, otherwise it's just going to be uneconomic for them. So I think sometimes you have to think, I'll get the product on the shelf. Do I have any leeway if I have to size it down, if I have to make a different size, if I have to take some of the cost out of the product? Can I do that? Could I use cheaper ingredients? I mean, obviously as you get bigger, you get more volume sales. You can go back to your supplier and say, can you do me a deal on this? Because I'm going to be buying this much of it. As you get bigger, you get some volume advantage when you're negotiating with your suppliers.
This is great info, and I want to actually kind of use this as a segue into your new book. I'm first going to start with a quote from your current book that's already out, Packed, The Food Entrepreneur's Guide, How to Get Noticed and How to Be Loved. And you say, if you come up with another smoothie or another cupcake, make sure it solves a genuine problem that people have with existing smoothies or cupcakes. I just finished Spin Selling, which is a classic, a little bit dated, and selling, really effective selling, is all about solving problems. Your new book is called Flying Off the Shelves, The Food Entrepreneur's Guide to Selling. I'd like you to pitch my audience here. I'm definitely going to read it because I loved Packed, but I'd like you to define selling and how can this help food startup founders?
Oh, well, thank you, Matt. I'm glad you liked the first book. Well, the reason I wrote the second book was that loads of people who read the first book, they said to me, well, that's all very well. And I've read your book and it kind of helps me get my product on the shelf and I know all the things I need to think about. But now I've got it on the shelf. Now what do I do? And I had lots and lots of emails from people with just that same question. Now what do I do? It's on the shelf. And I thought, right, well, there's some things to address here around selling. And in a way, when you've got a product on the shelf, let's take Whole Foods as an example, then you have 2 sets of relationships that you have to maintain. And one of them is with the buyer. So that's the person in Whole Foods that decided to stock your product. What can you do with them to build that relationship, to make sure that you're top of mind? And so in my new book, the first half has lots of contributions from successful food businesses and their hints and tips on how to approach your buyer at Whole Foods or Tesco or Sainsbury's in the case of the UK, what you need to take to them to be credible, and how you build the relationship after that. So once you're in the store, what do you do next to keep that person on side? And what do you do that makes them look good and their business category look good? So you work with them and you devise promotions together, or you say, we'll be running a campaign on social media. So you're very, very positive. And as one of my clients said, small yogurt business, and they deliberately make themselves incredibly easy to do business with. It's one of their tenets, one of their rules for themselves. We are easy to do business with. So whatever the buyer says to us, we will do it. We make ourselves easy to do business with. So they don't do long, complicated presentations. When the buyer is dealing with them, they know that it's going to be an easy transaction. And then your second group of relationships that you have is with the customers who are buying you off the shelf. You have to keep people interested. So I've then got the A to Z of selling. And these are tips on consumer psychology. So how to get in people's heads and sell to their desires, as I mentioned earlier. And lots of tips. So, for example, you might run an email newsletter. You might do a pop-up event. Pop-ups are very big in London. There are loads of pop-ups all over the place. So if you've got a granola brand, could you do a pop-up with a yoga studio? Could you provide a paleo breakfast, a workout studio where people are working hard and they're interested in paleo. So it's kind of like taking your product to places where people would be naturally interested in it. The second half is my A to Z of selling tips, which is everything that I've learned from working with small businesses and their tips and tricks that they've been willing to share with me for the book. And I'm extremely grateful because I've got some really fantastic tips. If they have particular questions after listening to this, then just email me on Twitter or message me, and I'll try and help out. My Twitter handle is Tessa, TESSA _Stuart, STUART. So Tessa_Stuart.
Listen, Tessa, I want to thank you so much for coming onto this show. I learned a ton today, and I know our listeners will as well. We're going to link not just to her Twitter, but to her current book. And since we're not too far away from the release of your second book, I'll go ahead and update it and inform our listeners when your second book comes out. And one more thing, we're going to do this offline. I'm also going to have Tessa recommend 3 to 4 top brands, in addition to Innocent, in the UK that you guys can study, best practices and things for your own food startups.
Well, thank you, Matt. It's been a huge pleasure, and I really, really appreciate this opportunity.
Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, find us online at foodstartupspodcast.com.